Vitalik, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor. We only have Vitalik for 20 minutes, so I'll ask him 2 questions, and then I'll open it up for you guys. So, Vitalik, you are a known privacy focused person. So you were a Tornado user, and you're now a Railgun user. Many people don't have that intense privacy focus. Do you think we should aim to get base layer privacy, or do you think kind of we should leave it up to people, given that a lot of people don't care or don't care enough, maybe?
Yeah, I could give the reason why I've been not strongly pushing base layer privacy historically, and I think it has nothing to do with any kind of idea that privacy is not important. I actually think privacy is a public good, and when I say that, I don't mean that in some feel-good way. I mean that in the literal sense that the more people use privacy solutions, the more privacy each one of them gets, and the more it gets normalized. Whereas if privacy gets used by very few people, that actually weakens privacy for everyone, right? So the reason why I was not a strong pusher of Zcash style layer 1 privacy historically is basically that if we look at concretely how you get privacy, you get privacy with ZK snarks, right? And there are also things like Monero and ring signatures and multi-round mixing and CoinJoin, but realistically ZK snarks are the gold standard. But then the problem is that there's 50 different types of ZK snarks, and every time we agree on which type of ZK snark is best, something better comes out 6 months later, right? You have elliptic curves, you have BN128, you have BLS12381, you have hash-based things, you have Halo, you have lookup tables, you have calc, you have do you do joining, do you do splitting? Now the discussion is privacy pools and how does that work? And the challenge is if you enshrine any one particular scheme, then we're basically making that decision on behalf of the protocol at a time when it seemed far too early to actually make that decision, right? And so that's why back in 2018, we instead decided to take this much more general purpose approach where we said, we are going to support the elliptic curve BN128 precompiles, add multiply pairing, and you can go build your own ZK snark-based privacy solutions on top, right? And people did, right? And people started off doing some demos, and then eventually Tornado Cash grew out of that, and then eventually Railgun, and now Oxbow grew out of that, and then there's Aztec and so on, right? And all of those are based on that BN128 precompile, and the rationale for making that precompile happen really was about making privacy on Ethereum possible, right? So I think the question around base layer privacy is basically, does the discussion changes if that rationale changes, right? And I think at some point it is plausible that we are going to get more and more certainty that this particular ZK snark solution is close enough to optimal that we should rally around it. This particular way of doing joins and splits is optimal enough. This particular way of doing privacy pools, this particular way of doing 1 or 2 other things. So I think you definitely could see a world where enough of those things stabilize that those arguments actually start to shift in the other direction, right? And we've seen that happen in other areas, right? With account abstraction, for example, right? Account abstraction really started to see success when we switched from doing protocol level changes to doing ERCs, off-chain standards like 4337, but then we realized that off-chain standards do have some limitations, and now 4337 has been reasonably successful, and if we want to give it its full power, then maybe it does actually make sense to enshrine some features of it, right? And so we've been having all this discussion around there's the 7702 and then 7560 and enshrinement and all of these things, right? So I think it's definitely a valid question if privacy is going to follow the same path eventually.
Yeah, that's a fantastic fantastic, very comprehensive answer. Do you think dApps until then should make the decision on behalf of users and kind of just embrace privacy fully, maybe at the cost of additional gas?
I mean, I think with privacy, it's important to focus on the basics before you like start to like go up the kind of the crazy tower and do really complex things. Like one of the worries I have is that you have engineers that are thinking about like, oh, how can we create theoretically perfect privacy preserving smart contracts, but then at the same time like we don't have the basic thing, which is just like the ability to privately send from one address to another inside of a wallet, right? Yep. And I actually think the valuable thing to start from is to like go from the bottom up, right? And like start from the most basic thing, and I think like privacy of basic transfers is the most basic thing, right? And like actually create an ecosystem where it's actually feasible for a user to have multiple wallets and to keep, or multiple addresses, and to keep creating new addresses to use one address per application, and to have stronger privacy between those. And then like once we get to that basic level, and then kind of keep climbing up from there, right? I think you always need to like start from the foundation. Mm-hmm.
This ties in really neatly with my next question. This is the second question, so get ready for your questions. So second question. More or less every bull run we talk about mainstream adoption, right? So it's price go up, and all of a sudden, like, when are we going to see this on Main Street? And kind of if you look at the values that we're currently offering to actual retail users, kind of decentralization itself is not a value, right? So kind of it's kind of what it enables, and kind of what it enables is individual agency, decentralized ownership, better user experience through kind of permissionless platforms and platformification. So kind of if you look at kind of the prospective users that we all hope will hopefully really come this bull run, what are the metrics by which they will be better off in Web3 based products than kind of the Web2 equivalent?
I think that answer is going to be very different for different groups of people, right? So like I was just in Africa, for example, right? And in Africa, the kinds of things that people build are like quite different, right? It's often just like much more pragmatic, like much more just like nuts and bolts. Like people have problems moving money from one country to another country, and like international finance still sucks in much of the world. Like 80% of countries are not part of SEPA, and like having easier ways to like just do basic international commerce. In a lot of countries, just having better ways to do basic savings, right? And like that's already value that it provides. To a lot of NFT artists there, it's just like the ability to participate in international markets, right? And like, be able to like actually raise revenue from people in, like wealthy countries, like people in wealthy countries already can, right? So like just kind of like basic international equality is, just kind of basic stability of a really simple economic system is something that's valuable for a lot of people. Then I think in other parts of the world, it's like the value of crypto generally comes from like where the outliers are, right? Like people who do things that are like just like unusual in some way, right? And like I think everyone is unusual on at least one axis, right? It's like when the world is as high dimensional and complex as our society is, like everyone does something that like the system doesn't serve well on at least some axis, right? And there's people who make international donations. There is people who want to like donate to organizations and preserve their privacy. There is people who wants to participate in things like prediction markets. There is like people who want to use things like ENS and IPFS and have websites that they can guarantee are going to remain online. There's just like this long tail of use cases. There's people who, for whatever reason, like dislike Twitter and want some kind of alternative, or even like Twitter but don't want Twitter to be the end of history. And I think the decentralized social media space with Farcaster and Lens has been Ethereum's kind of biggest rising category of non-financial applications, right? So like, it is all about the long tail, and the fact that it is the long tail kind of makes sense, because like, if there is one single thing that like huge amounts of mainstream people all wants to do, then like there is going to be more demand for mainstream like financial systems and mainstream institutions to serve it, right? And so I think crypto's value for people is just inherently in that longer tail of things, and that's kind of to be expected, and it's okay. I think it is slowly starting to grow, and like it is slowly starting to succeed in all of those areas, right? Like the thing I've always said about like real-world adoption of Ethereum is basically that the real-world adoption pitch, or the pitch for why real-world adoption of Ethereum will happen even though it hasn't happened yet, is basically because like all of the applications that we have in mind depend on things like scalability and low transaction fees and high convenience, but Ethereum in all of those dimensions is total crap, but we have a roadmap for why one day it won't be total crap. And like now, guess what? We have blobs, and like if you go to like l2fees.io, or I think growthepie.xyz is the other one, like you actually look at the prices today, and like Ethereum is like along those dimensions no longer total crap, right? Like we've I remember saying like about 7 years ago that the internet of money should not cost 5 cents a transaction, and then people laughed at me because Ethereum is more expensive than 5 cents a transaction. But like, guess what? Today it isn't, right? Like, get on an L2, it's under a cent. So like that aspect of things is actually changing, right? And then the same is true with user experience. Like I remember 2.5 years ago when I was in Argentina and I was trying to pay for a coffee, and I had to wait like 5 minutes for a confirmation. And then we had EIP 1559, and that reduced the average waiting time to like 12 seconds. Then we had the merge, and because of weird statistical reasons, that actually reduces the average wait time by a factor of 2 without decreasing the block time. And then we have layer 2s, and then layer 2s are doing pre-confirmations, right? So like it actually feels like now where we've like turned that corner, and we're at the point where creating those more mainstream applications actually is realistic. And so we actually do have like that opportunity, right? So if you actually look at some of the applications that I mentioned, they are starting to see their own success in their own areas. So I think like things in Ethereum adoption are going quite well.
Cool. Thank you so much. Questions from the audience? I see one here up front.
Hi, Vitalik. Gareth here from Cointelegraph. I'm very curious about your thoughts on the Ethereum ETFs. There's a lot of chatter that they might get the go-ahead today. Does it matter to you, and does it matter to get this endorsement from mainstream finance? And secondly, your thoughts on Alexei Pertsev going to jail in the Netherlands, and the precedent that it sets for privacy tools going forward in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the Alexei thing is definitely really unfortunate. Like, I think, like a lot of people have been, going under the assumption that, society had a line, and, just building software is something that's okay, and is, a totally, like legal and legit way to fight for privacy. And, there are regulations, but, those regulations apply to operators and transmitters and companies, and like even FinCEN like explicitly said things of that type. I know FinCEN is not European, and like I know precedents are country by country, but I think at the there is definitely still a level at which these things are international. So it's again definitely really really sad, and I definitely hope that with Roman's trial in the U.S. we get some positive clarity there. But no, I think privacy is important, and I think the ecosystem's willingness to even also rally around things like sort of like Railgun and Oxbow and similar next generation approaches really shows a lot of people's the sincerity of the desire to actually focus on providing privacy for the common people and not empowering the Kremlin or whoever else. And I think that's something that the ecosystem really stands behind, right? So I'm really supportive of people working on those things, and I hope that the things go in a good direction within the ecosystem, and I think I also hope that governments as well see the value of this, right? I think it's important to also stress that it's not true that governments are uniformly hostile to privacy, and here in Europe, we have laws like GDPR that even actually mandate it, right? And there's definitely an inevitable clash and a conversation, and these are normal things that happen in democracies. But I think with a lot of these second generation solutions that are being developed, and a lot of the active work, and even I think very deliberately conciliatory work that's been done by people like me, and I hope that we can come to a better equilibrium on this. And
here also in the front.
Yeah, I think, stablecoins are clearly really important and really valuable for people, right? If you go to places like, Africa or Latin America, for example, right? And if you look at, the ways in which they use crypto, a lot of the time it is stablecoins, right? People in those kinds of places where they have, real direct personal problems that crypto solves, they're very pragmatic people. They're not going to, use Bitcoin or use Ether just because it's only kosher to use Bitcoin or use Ether. They want stability. They do not want things that can fall by 30% in a single day. And I think that's really a totally reasonable thing for them to expect, and it's a really valuable service that stablecoins provide. I think there's definitely challenges with the stablecoin ecosystem as it exists today, right? It definitely does create dependence on the US dollar, and I would definitely prefer the Ethereum ecosystem to have a lower level of dependence on the US dollar. And this is part of why I think things like RAI, even though they're still US dollar based, the fact that they don't attempt to track the US dollar exactly, I think makes them somewhat of a bridge to some form of stability that's not directly backed by the currency of a single country. But at this, so very supportive of things like that, very supportive of stable assets of other types being created. Though I do think it's one of those things where some of these other approaches are they're not going to succeed immediately, but I think they are really valuable to have in the back pocket.
Cool. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you for all coming, and thank you most of all to Vitalik for stopping by.
Yes, we're happy to be here. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.